Once more of a regional favorite, the American demand for avocados has skyrocketed in the 21st century, with the United States Department of Agriculture noting that the U.S. annual per capita demand tripling between 2000 and 2021 to about 8 pounds per year, or about one avocado per person per month. And while there's lots of reasons for this increase in demand, there has been some difficulty meeting the supply. But whether it's for that trendy toast that you eat in the morning or for the guacamole at your Sunday football party, the story of this evergreen fruit adds a spicy addition to the mix. While the history of the avocado is tied to Mesoamerica, that isn't likely where the party started. Rather, an article presented in the 1990 International Symposium of the Culture of Subtropical and Tropical Fruits and Crops notes that the genus Persea likely developed in Africa and rafted, meaning was carried by ocean currents, to the Americas. Persea is a genus of medium sized tropical leafy evergreen trees whose fruit is an oval or pear shaped berry. Despite the African origins of the genus, it became nearly extinct in Africa as the continent slowly became drier. The website Avocados Mexico posits the reasons for the fruit's notably large pit. Prior to its domestication, it's thought that the survival of the avocado may have been dependent upon the ability of since extinct large mammals to stomach the fruit's mildly toxic pit after swallowing the large berry whole. In theory, the seed was ready to sprout at the time it was excreted. That is, the pit allowed the tree to be propagated through mammoth poop. The fruit has long been an important part of Mesoamerican diet and culture. A 2007 article in the journal Harvard Papers in Botany notes that it's possible that even before some human groups transitioned from hunter gatherer lifestyles to agriculture, they valued the avocado fruit as nutritious and managed and cultivated the crop in its natural stands for a long time. In any case, seed remains found in the Tehuacan Valley suggest cultivation of the crop at least as far back as 10,000 years ago, and domestication as far back as 7,000 years, meaning that the crop was domesticated roughly in the same period as bananas and cotton and before the invention of the wheel. While the exact history of the use of avocados prior to European contact is uncertain, the significance of the fruit can be divined from evidence such as the Mayan civil calendar, where the 14th month is represented by a glyph depicting an avocado. More evidence of its cultural importance comes from the fact that many different cultures had names for the fruit. Early Spanish chroniclers listed instances where avocados were used as tribute to rulers or traded as money. The Harvard Papers article, written by a team from Veracruz University, noted that the Spanish recognized the use of avocados as animal feed, remedy for bruises and split ends, and even as stamps on fabric. Evidence from seed remains suggests that avocados were a trade item, spreading use throughout the Americas, although not to the West Indies. A 1605 Spanish publication suggests that the fruit may have been discovered by the Incas via conquest in the northern part of the empire. If so, the Incas likely only discovered avocados, which they named Palta after the area they had conquered, a few decades before the Spanish arrived. The Spanish, interested in any new species in the Americas, recognized the fruit's value early on. A 1519 publication by colonial official Martin Fernandez de Inquizo said, "That which it contains is like butter and is of marvelous flavor, so good and pleasing to the palate that it is a marvelous thing." Other Spanish chroniclers compared the fruit to figs and pears. The website of the University of California at Riverside argues that the first European to give a name to the fruit was conquistador Pedro de Cieza de Leon, writing in the 1530s and using the name aguacate, from which the modern name is derived. The name seems to have come from the Aztec language, Nahuatl, where the fruit was called ahucatl. The Aztecs considered avocados to be an aphrodisiac, and as they grow in pairs, related them to love and sex. That, and well, a superficial resemblance, led to the name. Ahucatl means testicle. The Spanish used aguacate as it was apparently easier to pronounce in Spanish, and the first use of the anglicized avocado was in 1696, although some early references also used the name alligator pear, which actually might be preferable given the image of testicles spread on toast. Regardless of the name, the Spanish soon helped to spread the newly discovered plant. A 1950 edition of the journal Economic Botany argues that the fruit was taken to the West Indies, Jamaica, and Cuba by the Spanish shortly after contact. English physician W. Hughes found them in Jamaica in 1672 and called them one of the most rare and pleasant fruits on the island. It nourishes and strengtheneth the body, corroborating the spirits and procuring lust exceedingly. George Washington, visiting the island of Barbados with his mother in 1751, encountered them there and noted their abundance on the island in his journal. The Costa Rican newspaper, the Tico Times, notes that Spanish and British shipmen embraced the fruit as a gift sent from the heavens to satiate their longing for the flavor of butter. And the unique flavor of the avocado, the Times reports, is because while other fruits gain sugar as they ripen, the avocado sugar content decreases as it matures. The Spanish carried the fruit back to Europe, and at least by the mid 17th century, the avocado was carried to South Africa by Dutch colonists, where they become a cash crop, and thus completing the circle by rafting back to the continent where they may have originated. The language website Babbel writes that the crop was eventually introduced to Indonesia, Brazil, the Levant, South Africa, Australia, and crucially, California throughout the 19th century. The culinary website Spruce Eats note that the trees were successfully cultivated in Florida by 1833, but did not initially gain wide acceptance. An Agricultural Society report in 1856 lists trees being grown in California. But in 1871, Judge R.B. Ord imported several trees from Mexico into the Santa Barbara area, and an industry slowly developed, which included breeding different varieties. When a tree produces a desirable kind of fruit, grafting can be used to reproduce that tree. In the early 20th century, the most popularly grown variety was the fuerte, Spanish for strong, variety, with a relatively smooth skin and a rich nutty flavor. The parent tree for the fuerte variety was grown in a garden in Atlixco, Mexico, and in 1911 cuttings from that tree were taken to the United States, where it became the most popular variety grown, eventually accounting for about two-thirds of California's production. At this time, the name for the fruit was still in question, with it often being marketed as alligator fruit. In May of 1915, a group of California growers met and decided upon the name avocado. But sometime in the late 1920s, the website of the California avocado industry explains a mailman named Rudolf Haas purchased a seed that grew a tree that produced a unique fruit. Haas, the website explains, initially planned to graft the tree, but the grafts didn't take. Then he intended to cut the tree down, but the website continues Haas's children talked him out of it. They preferred the taste of the tree's fruit to that of the fuerte, the predominant variety and industry standard in those days. Haas patented the Haas avocado in 1935. He entered into a contract with Harold Brokaw, a nurseryman near the town of Whittier, who marketed the new variety. The website writes Brokaw began to propagate the rough, black Haas exclusively and promote it in favor of the standard varieties of the day. It made sense. The Haas was a far better bearer than the Fuerte, and it matured at a different time of year. Because of the seasonal advantage, Brokaw was successful to the point of yearly sellouts of his nursery crops. By the time the patent expired in 1952, the same year that Rudolf Haas expired, it had become more popular than the Fuerte. Not only was the flavor popular, but the California Avocados website explains grocers favored it for its durability and longer shelf life. Today, the Haas avocado is the most popular variety, accounting for 80% of all avocados eaten worldwide and 95% of those grown in California. The parent tree from which all Haas avocados trees trace their lineage finally died of root rot in 2002. But the early market was limited. Time magazine wrote in 2017 that avocados were both relatively scarce and exorbitantly expensive. Advertisements in Vogue and the New Yorker throughout the 1920s declared the avocado the aristocrat of salad fruits, and famed chefs were commissioned to mix the fruit with a grapefruit or stuff it with lobster and serve it up with their well-heeled clientele. Time continues that the finest hotels in Los Angeles and San Francisco were selling these fruits for $1 each, the equivalent of roughly $24 today, earning them the nickname among farmers of green gold. The most valuable fruit trees in the world at the time were avocado trees. But the fruit had difficulty gaining national acceptance, and popularity was generally limited to the areas where avocados were grown. Oldsters like myself might recall them being far more rare in the 1970s. Part of this is the nature of the crop. Avocados tend to be alternate bearing. That is, the tendency of the avocado to alternate between years of heavy production, known in the industry as on years, and seasons of light production. A 2015 paper published in the Proceedings of the World Avocado Congress writes the resulting boom bust cycle would add a level of chaos to the marketing channels. In one year, there would be an oversupply of fruit, forcing marketers to identify new outlets through which to sell avocados. But the years of low production would force the same marketers to selectively reduce the number of outlets through which they sold avocados. The inconsistency of supply made it impossible to sustainably build demand across the country and resulted in large portions of the United States remaining underdeveloped as avocado markets. Another issue, Time writes, was their still strong reputation as an aphrodisiac, which Time says made it much more difficult to sell to the rather prudish American eating public. It was, the Spruce Eats writes, slow growth to wide appeal. Time notes that the surge in immigration from Latin America that followed the passage of the 1965 Immigration and Naturalization Act helped to spur demand, as did decreasing prices from a planting boom as more land was given to production in California. Spruce Eats notes also that lowered input restrictions against Mexican grown avocados in the 1990s helped fuel demand by providing enough supply to stock grocery stores outside of California. Marketing finally started to create a sustainable market. The World Avocado Congress paper notes that it was during these years that the avocado holidays were first established. The industry identified the Super Bowl and Cinco de Mayo as important days to promote avocado consumption. The Super Bowl helped to get the harvest season started with a great interest from supermarkets, bars, and restaurants. This was followed by the mid-season promotions in May, which helped to sustain sales velocity during the period of peak harvest volumes in the late spring. Although Time notes that the low-fat crusades of the 1980s did leave a dent on consumption of the famously fatty avocado. This finally set the fatty fruit up for the boom, Spruce Eats writes. Widespread appreciation for the avocado really arrived with the 21st century, though. According to the Haas Avocado Board, in 15 years, the number of avocados sold in the United States quadrupled to more than 2 billion pounds in 2015. By 2019, it was estimated that America spent close to $58 million buying avocados, and the fruit that once had trouble earning fans in prior decades has now become a superfood everyone is talking about and getting their hands on. Despite the relatively new demand, the most popular uses of the avocado are generally old recipes. While avocado toast seems like a new trend, it actually developed in Australia in the 1990s, but a 2016 article in Vice magazine notes a reference to avocado sandwiches in a 1937 edition of The New Yorker. But that wasn't by any means the first use of avocado on bread. In the 19th century, avocado was often called midshipman's butter, referring to its common use on ships, smeared across hardtack. Guacamole is an even older recipe. The name is derived from an Aztec dish made as early as the 14th century that was called guacamole, meaning avocado sauce, which is made from avocados mashed and added to ingredients like tomatoes, chilies, and salt, very much like the modern recipe. And another popular use was in the Americanized version of Japanese cuisine. The Japan Times wrote in 2015, while accounts vary, a popular story claims that in the 1960s, a Japanese chef in California who couldn't get a hold of fatty tuna used avocado instead for its similar texture. This led to the birth of the California roll and the avocado's subsequent popularity in sushi in the United States. Today, avocados are found commonly in U.S. grocery stores, and Spruce Eats notes that the Super Bowl Sunday 2016 saw Americans consume nearly 140 million pounds of avocado in just one day, mostly in the form of guacamole. Avocados are marketed for their health value, Spruce Eats continues. High in potassium and the so-called good fat, avocados have become the darling of nutritionists. They may even be a better standard bearer than the apple for the wisdom of one a day to keep the doctor away. Free of cholesterol themselves, they help lower bad cholesterol and contain 20 essential vitamins and minerals, all in a package of 160 calories for a 100-gram serving. They also contain a notable amount of protein, unusual for any fruit, with 2 grams per 100-gram serving. In 2023, National Public Radio noted that in 1985, Americans ate 436 million pounds of avocados, but by 2020, that had skyrocketed to 2.7 billion pounds. And the United States Department of Agriculture notes that American supply has simply not kept up with that demand. Today, about 90% of the domestic supply in the United States is produced on foreign farms. That number was just 40% even in the early 2000s. And the high cash value as well as the resource demands of a water-hungry crop have led to widespread deforestation and biodiversity loss across Central America, as well as violence, as violent gangs have moved in trying to control this valuable commodity. Thus, the ancient fruit that's had so many names has earned yet another new moniker, the new blood diamonds. It's not an easy problem to address, as the ancient fruit faces the challenges of the modern age. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community and locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop, book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.